Now, one thing really stuck in my craw about this debate on whether the Morrison government did enough to stop China making a security deal with the Solomon Islands, which is serious stuff. I mean, there's a possible Chinese military base, maybe going to be built one day, 2,000 kilometres from our coast. But this is how Labor yesterday belted the government by mocking the ethnic name of the minister that the government had sent to those islands 2 weeks ago to talk to their strangely prickly Prime Minister and ask why on earth he was doing this. It's our Minister for the Pacific, Zed Seselja. And this was clearly a coordinated mockery of his name by Labor.
And they send some bloke called Zed. Who's Zed? Is this Pulp Fiction or national security?
Australia's response was not to send any serious delegation. They sent Senator Zed Seselja. Every time I hear Zed, I just think about Pulp Fiction.
Ho, 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 there's a character in Pulp Fiction called Zed. Well, that insult was then retweeted by another Labor MP, Josh Burns. Who's Zed? With the link to Jason Clare's so-called joke about the name. Well, joining me is Senator Zed Seselja. Zed Seselja, thanks for your time. Labor obviously coordinated this to make fun of your name. You had Anthony Albanese and Jason Clare both telling the same lame joke about your Croatian name. I'm just wondering, did you find that offensive? I mean, do they make jokes about names like Wong as well and Chow? I mean, where does this stop?
Well, look, Andrew, it's a fair point. I thought it was pretty low rent. I thought it was clearly coordinated, and they thought it was funny or something, and I don't know exactly who they were playing to. But I mean, those of us who have grown up, you know, being called Wog and have funny names, as I do, Zdenko Seselja, and it's been shortened to Zed. You know, unfortunately, you're probably pretty used to that in the schoolyard. But you know, in political debate, I took it as a sign that all of the other arguments they'd made in the space had completely fallen flat. I mean, they made the argument about aid. We demonstrated we've significantly upped our aid to the Pacific. They talked about climate change. Well, the deal is with the world's largest emitter, and then they decided instead to focus on me and focus on my name being a bit different. But you'd have to say, Andrew, that if my name was Dave or Steve, they wouldn't have made the same joke, and certainly wouldn't have, you know, been asking those questions. And I think if the shoe was on the other foot, if it was Liberals talking about Labor MPs and doing it in relation to their ethnic names, I suspect they would be expressing a fair degree of outrage. So yeah, pretty low rent stuff. What we've come to expect from the Labor Party, particularly when they're out of answers on policy.
Yeah, the first to scream racist and the first to act it, it seems to me. And the media generally has been ignoring that, this element of it, because, well, you're the target and it's not a Liberal actually the perpetrator. Now, they're also mocking the government for sending you to the Solomon Islands, calling you a junior minister, instead of, you know, sending Foreign Minister Marise Payne to try to fix this conundrum. Do you know why she wouldn't go? It is a bit odd, isn't it?
Well, look, Marise Payne was engaging very strongly with her counterparts, as was our Prime Minister, and I, as the Minister for the Pacific, was engaging here in Australia with a number of Pacific leaders that were here, obviously through phone calls into the Pacific and with other counterparts, and indeed through that trip. I would make the point, I mean, they talk about, you know, junior ministers, when the Labor, and they might be a bit confused, because the Labor Party, when they were in government and Richard Marles was responsible for the Pacific, they had it as a parliamentary secretary, so they did have it in a sort of more junior position, and we elevated it because of the importance that Scott Morrison particularly put on engaging with this part of the world. It's just another one of the differences between our approach and the Labor Party's approach. So we've engaged at all levels, and indeed not only those engagements from the Prime Minister, from the Foreign Minister, from myself as Minister for the Pacific, but also our most senior officials have been not only on the phone but visiting there in person. So this is a broad engagement, and this sort of claim that, you know, if only it had been a different level of minister with this meeting at this time, that the result would have been different, I think is naive at best, and is a cheap political potshot that's, you know, that isn't backed up by any facts. And we've seen, I think, in the debate from the Labor Party with the so-called alternate plan they've put out, that they clearly haven't thought about this issue in any depth.
Oh, I'm going to be talking about that plan later in the show. Don't you worry about that. But Zed Seselja, you actually did go there. Now, you've met the Prime Minister of the Solomon Islands there, Manasseh Sogavare. Now, is what we're told about this bloke right? That this man has got a chip on his shoulder about Australia and about white colonialism, and you can't talk to him?
Well, look, I mean, obviously, you know, I mean, other people can make their commentary. I think Prime Minister Sogavare has had things to say previously about Australia and the like. But, I mean, obviously, you know, I was there delivering a very firm message on behalf of the Australian government, and so that's a challenging discussion. It's absolutely a challenging discussion.
No, I've got that bit, but what did you get back from him? What did you get back from him? How did he strike you?
Well, look, I wouldn't go into all of the details of the discussion other than to say that I put our view very firmly, and obviously the Prime Minister on behalf of the Solomon Islands has taken a different approach and expressed a different approach, but it's important that we do those things face to face. It's important, I think, that we're very direct, and when I have conversations, I am very direct. I talk about the fact that we have responded. We responded within 12 hours, you know, with our ADF and our AFP on the ground in the Solomon Islands. That we are by far the biggest supporter of the Solomon Islands on any measure, whether it's in health, in education, in security. This is the point, Zed.
I've gone through all that myself. I've gone through all this, you know, what we've done, how China is a threat, how China, you know, if you're going to talk about global warming, look at China, you know, for heaven's sake. None of it's worked. Right? None of it's worked to change this guy's mind. So I'm trying to figure out what is going through this bloke's mind. You spoke to him. No one else in the government has, you know, gone over there for a long time and talked to him face to face. What do you reckon is ticking back there? Or do you believe claims by other Solomon Island politicians that this government was bought off with Chinese money? Or have you got an alternative explanation?
Well, look, there's no doubt that we've seen the attitude and the way that the Chinese government, the Chinese Communist Party, has interacted in the region. And we know it's not always playing by the same rules as Australia plays by. And that is one of the great challenges we face strategically. It is why every effort needs to be made and has been made and needs to continue to be made. It's why we continue to engage with our allies such as the United States. But I think it's fair to say, Andrew, that the Chinese government does not play by the same rules as the Australian government. We have transparency.
So when you say that, I mean, we hear this. Yeah, got that. I got that. So when you say that, what do you? The way I hear it is you think that there was bribery, but that's your way of saying it. I would be wrong about that, would I?
Well, look, Andrew, you can, I guess, draw whatever conclusions you like. I will obviously point out what we do. I will point out what, I guess, the Chinese government has been engaged in within the region, and it hasn't always been to the standards that we would expect, and the transparency and the accountability that we have over the very significant contribution we make to the region, a contribution far more significant than any other country.
All right, let's put the bribery thing to one side. Once money like that's involved, what the hell can you do? Did he actually give you an excuse as to what is done? You know, give you something you could take back to Canberra saying, well, he's done this because he thinks, I don't know, China would be good for his people, or what excuse did he give?
Well, look, there has been a claim made by the Solomon Islands government that the Australian AFP and ADF didn't properly defend all assets, including Chinese assets, in the Solomon Islands. Now, what I've said is that in responding within 12 hours and ensuring we restored peace and stability and order within hours of our arrival, and all assets were protected as needed, working with the Royal Solomon Islands Police Force. So we have a very different opinion opinion on that, and I stand by our ADF and our AFP, who I visited with when I was in the Solomon Islands, and the job they did. There is no disputing the fact that within 12 hours we responded to that request from the Solomon Islands government, and our brave men and women were on the ground and restored order within hours of landing. And that's something we can be very proud of, and that's something I stand by.
Zed Seselja, thank you so much for your time.
Thanks very much for having me, Andrew. Appreciate it.